Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and Sophomore English. We turn now to Denise Levertov's A Tree Telling of Orpheus. Hey, I want to start though on page 656, 657. Read with me on 656. Of course, the big question is, does all communication serve a positive purpose? Notice, I'm just reading with you. This is going to be important for this Levertov offering. In Poetry Collection number 2, we're working with collection number 2 now. In Poetry Collection number 2, the speakers in the poems communicate unusual perspectives. Write that down. Communicate unusual perspectives about a variety of things, many of them found in nature. All right? So let's pay attention now to this offering by Denise Levertov. Let's meet Levertov on page 657. Born in 1923, dies in 1997. When Levertov moved to the United States from England in 1948, so write that down. She starts in England, comes to the United States. She became associated with an experimental community of writers. She said that the freewheeling open forms, we want to write that down in 2B, open forms she used allow her to explore chaos, quote unquote, which is a really fascinating way to kind of think about what you're doing when you write a poem. And in fact, when you look at page 659, 660, 661, go ahead and flip through those pages to just get a sense of how long this poem is. Notice its interesting stanza breakdowns. Do you see that? We're maybe going to ask this question in 2B, so write this down. How does what Levertov does with structure form, stanza line breaking, have anything to do with the subject of the poem? Now this is an interesting title. A Tree Telling of Orpheus? Let's read the background information at 659 really quickly and maybe take a couple of notes at 3A. Because you got to understand this stuff to appreciate what we're about to read. An allusion, write that down in 2B, an allusion is a reference to a person, event, or place, or artistic work. Not allusion like I-L-L-U-S-I-O-N, what the magician does when he makes the elephant disappear. This is allusion, a reference, okay? Levertov's poem is an extended allusion, write this at 2B, an extended allusion to the classic Greek myth of Orpheus. We want to write that down at 2B as well as at 3A. Orpheus. Orpheus's skill on the lyre, the harp, an ancient stringed instrument, was so great and his voice so beautiful that trees were said to uproot themselves to follow him. In other words, put it in your notes, Orpheus is the first rock star. Orpheus is the first musician that thousands of people will go nuts to hear. Okay? We are familiar, of course, in our culture today of one or two artists that can still do that, right? Show up in public and everybody goes crazy or whatever. Keep reading with me. Orpheus' skill on the lyre, an ancient stringed instrument, was so great that his voice so beautiful that trees were said to uproot themselves to follow him. In the end, tragically, he was torn limb from limb by his frenzied followers, the Maenads. So you want to write that down as well. He sang so well that the beautiful Maenads attacked him and tore him apart. Flung into a nearby river, his head was said to continue singing as it floated downstream. Now, again, our goal here in reading this poem is to study point of view. Are you ready? Let's write it down in 2B. In this poem, the point of view is a tree that will describe the stirrings of the emotions that were created by the music of nature. All right? So let's pay attention now. We'll read through the poem, and then we'll come back to do a bit of annotating. I hope you enjoy this poem. It's a beautiful poem.
A Tree Telling of Orpheus by Denise Levertov. White dawn, stillness. When the rippling began, I took it for sea wind, coming to our valley with rumors of salt, of treeless horizons. But the white fog didn't stir. The leaves of my brothers remained outstretched, unmoving. Yet the rippling drew nearer. And then my own outermost branches began to tingle, almost as if fire had been lit below them, too close, and their twig tips were drying and curling. Yet I was not afraid, only deeply alert.
660.
I was the first to see him, for I grew out on the pasture slope, beyond the forest. He was a man, it seemed. The two moving stems, the short trunk, the two arm branches, flexible, each with 5 leafless twigs at their ends. And the head that's crowned by brown or gold grass, bearing a face not like the beaked face of a bird, more like a flower's. He carried a burden made of some cut branch, bent while it was green, strands of a vine tight stretched across it.
The lyre,
From
right?
this, when he touched it, and from his voice, which, unlike the wind's voice, had no need of our leaves and branches to complete its sound, came the ripple. But it was now no longer a ripple. He had come near and stopped in my first shadow. It was a wave that bathed me, as if rain rose from below and around me instead of falling. And what I felt was no longer a dry tingling. I seemed to be singing as he sang. I seemed to know what the lark knows. All my sap was mounting towards the sun that by now had risen. The mist was rising, the grass was drying, yet my roots felt music moisten them deep under earth. He came still closer, leaned on my trunk. The bark thrilled like a leaf still folded. Music. There was no twig of me not trembling with joy and fear. Then as he sang, it was no longer sounds only that made the music. He spoke. And as no tree listens, I listened, and language came into my roots, out of the earth, into my bark, out of the air, into the pores of my greenest shoots, gently as dew. And there was no word he sang, but I knew its meaning.
661.
He told of journeys, of where sun and moon go while we stand in dark, of an earth journey he dreamed he would take someday, deeper than roots. He told of the dreams of man, wars, passions, griefs, and I, a tree, understood words. It seemed my thick bark would split like a sapling's that grew too fast in the spring when a late frost wounds it. Fire, he sang, that trees fear, and I, a tree, rejoiced in its flames. New buds broke forth from me, though it was full summer, and though his lyre, now I knew its name, were both frost and fire, its chords flamed up to the crown of me. I was seed again. I was fern in the swamp. I was coal. And at the heart of my wood, so close I was to becoming man or a god, there was a kind of silence, a kind of sickness, something akin to what men call boredom. Something, the poem descended a scale, a stream over stones, that gives to a candle a coldness in the midst of its burning, he said. It was then, when in the blaze of his power that reached me and changed me, I thought I should fall my length, that the singer began to leave me. Slowly moved from my noon shadow to open light. Words leaping and dancing over his shoulders, back to me, rivery sweep of lyre tones becoming slowly again ripple.
662.
And I, in terror, but not in doubt of what I must do, in anguish, in haste, wrenched from the earth, root after root, the soil heaving and cracking, the moss tearing asunder. And behind me, the others, my brothers forgotten since dawn. In the forest, they too had heard, and were pulling their roots in pain out of 1,000 years' layers of dead leaves, rolling the rocks away, breaking themselves out of their depths. You would have thought we would lose the sound of the lyre, of the singing, so dreadful the storm sounds were, where there was no storm, no wind, but the rush of our branches moving, our trunks breasting the air. But the music reached us. Clumsily, stumbling over our own roots, rustling our leaves in answer, we moved, we followed. All day we followed, uphill and down. We learned to dance, for he would stop where the ground was flat, and words he said taught us to leap and to wind in and out around one another in figures the lyre's measure designed, The singer laughed till he wept to see us. He was so glad. At sunset, we came to this place I stand in, this knoll, with its ancient grove that was bare grass then. In the last light of the day, his song became farewell. He stilled our longing. He sang our sun-dried roots back into earth, watered them, all-night rain of music so quiet we could almost not hear it in the moonless dark.
663.
By dawn he was gone. We have stood here since, in our new life. We have waited. He does not return. It is said he made his earth journey and lost what he sought. It is said they felled him and cut up his limbs for firewood. And it is said his head still sang and was swept out to sea, singing. Perhaps he will not return. But what we have lived comes back to us. We see more. We feel, as our rings increase, something that lifts our branches, that stretches our furthest leaf tips further. The wind, the birds do not sound poorer, but clearer, recalling our agony and the way we danced. The music.
Now, I've had sophomores that say, there's two things I never look at the same again after this poem. One is trees, especially anytime the wind is moving trees, like, when we look at it, Ruthie's tree and the branches are moving. The other is, I'll never look at art the same way again after a poem like this. Never look at music the same way. Why is it the first thing you do, if you do it, when you get in your vehicle is you turn on the music? Or when you show up in your room, the first thing you do is turn on your music? Why is it that some of you love music so much, you walk around with an earbud in your one ear, listening to music all day? This poem speaks to why you do that. And so all of a sudden, you're not just listening to the music, you're asking, why am I so attracted to music? Like, what is it that makes me come back to certain songs over and over again? Let's go ahead now and look at the poem itself and analyze at level 1 what's happening, and then of course at level 2 what it means. At level 1, it's a simple poem of 3 parts. Let's write it down. Part 1, Orpheus, the greatest rock star, the greatest musician of them all. Orpheus shows up. By the way, every great musician in the history of music, from Mozart and Beethoven all the way down to Elvis, and of course today any of the musicians that are most popular, someone has always equated that musician with Orpheus. Orpheus is the quintessential exemplar of the great artist, right? So he shows up singing, playing his music, singing, and the trees are so amazed that they come out of the ground and begin to walk, following the music to a different place. When they get to that other place at the end of the day, their roots take root in another place. They have been transported. Write that down at level 1. They have been moved. They have been transported. They have been changed. The music has somehow forced them to evolve. And there they are now. Of course, the last part of the poem is the recognition that Orpheus never returned again. That there was in fact even a story that Orpheus's head was taken off, thrown in a river, and his head continued to sing. But at the end of the poem, we hear it doesn't matter, because what has transpired through the music cannot be undone. Now I want to pause for a moment, and I'm actually, before I jump to 2a, I'm going to go to 2b. Question: why do you think Levertov plays around with the stanza breaks? I mean, I'm just going to give you one example. We could do this a lot, but look at page 660. Look at the last lines on page 660. By the way, those who love music and my musicians always say this is one of the favorite poems that they've ever studied once they're done with it. Because for them, this poem speaks directly to their love of music and creating music, we might say. Look on page 660 though. At the, around line 44. Then as he sang, talking about Orpheus, right? It was no longer sounds only that made the music. He spoke, And as no tree listens, I listened, and language came into my roots. Notice the breaks. It's almost like roots. I've had students that look at this construction of these, it's almost like roots going into the ground. The way Ruthie's tree, we know, has more of Ruthie's tree under the ground than above the ground. We know this about trees, right? That is to say, the roots. Look at it. I listened, and language came into my roots, out of the earth, into my bark, out of the air, into the pores of my greenish shoots, gently as dew. And there was no word he's saying, but I knew its meaning. That is to say, notice the physical construction of the lines literally looks like roots reaching out, grabbing for, of course, what are roots doing when they go into the earth? They're looking for water, for nourishment. What is the water? What is the nourishment of the human soul? It's music, isn't it? It's art, it's music. It's that thing that somehow speaks to us. It's fascinating to play this game. I once had my seniors just play this game because I taught some seniors that were beautiful, had beautiful voices. And I said, watch how this works. All you have to do at lunch hour is just go and stand in the commons area and start singing a song. And within a matter of 30 seconds, I'll bet you'll have over 50 people standing there watching. No way, they're all leaving, they want to go to lunch. Sure enough, they did it. And sure enough, students, yeah, dude, there's something going on in the commons area. And as they got closer, students would report they heard the voices and they were like they're attracted to it. If you ever hear music, what is that about? You hear music and you start kind of, dude, where is that coming? Like, isn't that weird? That is to say, there's something within us that makes us human. Although, notice, a tree is the speaker of this poem. Something that is within nature, that longs for the music, that longs for the art, that longs for the expression, I would argue, that longs for the learning. That is the key to this poem. The power of music is the power of learning. Let's now go to work at 2A. Notice, as we work through the poem now, we begin with a powerful simile on page 659. The music led to rippling, then to tingling. How do you describe it? Look at line 7. As if fire had been lit below. Many students have said, we'll ask this at 3B, when was the last time you felt this? Maybe it was at a concert, when you somehow felt like it's an out-of-body experience, or you somehow felt on fire, like there was something happening inside of you. Of course, it's just notes, right? And as Mozart argued, the music is in the silence, in the space between the notes. And yet when those notes are put in a certain order, blown away, right? Orpheus shows up on page 660. The lyre is there. We studied the notion of the power of the music. But notice on 661, he told of journeys. This is what all art does. This is why we say, you are the stories you tell, the stories you retell. Why is it there's certain songs on your playlist you come back to? Dude, you've already heard them. You know them. Why do you got to listen to them again? Because I like them. No. That's what a child answers. Give a real answer. Why do you keep coming back to the same songs over and over again? The mature answer is, because I like them. But now we understand what it means. It speaks to me. It somehow represents my journey. My life is my journey. My life is my story. And art and music speak to that in some profound way. Look at the amazing line on page 661, line 57, right? He told of journeys, of where sun and moon go while we stand in dark, of an earth journey he dreamed he would take someday deeper than roots. He told of the dreams of man, wars, passions, griefs, and I, a tree, understood words. It seemed my thick bark would split. Again, the symbolism here is profound. Split like a sapling's that grew too fast in the spring when a late frost wounds it. Look at that line again and recognize that is the sophomore year. That is what happens when we meet compelling art. We are somehow changed. We are somehow moved. We are somehow altered, not the same. He comes back to fire. Hey, by the way, did you notice this on 661? Frost and fire, as opposed to Frost's, the great poet, Fire and Ice. We mentioned it in the earlier lecture, didn't we? Notice the tree says, there's something about art that transcends boredom, that takes us out of our boredom. Why is it that when we're feeling bored or sad or melancholy, we turn to music? right? Notice the learning that could take place on 661 at line 80. It was then, when in the blaze of his power that reached me and changed me, I thought I should fall my length, that the singer began to leave me. This is the essence of learning. This is the essence of experiences. We have an experience, and then it moves on. And we're somehow what? Look on page 662. And I in terror, but not in doubt of what I must do in anguish and haste, wrenched from the earth, root after root. Dude, is this not an amazing word picture? What is it like to learn a new idea that somehow moves you? You're changed. It's like you're stuck in the ground as a tree, and then all of a sudden an idea moves you, and you get out of the ground. In other words, let's put it in our notes this way. Art, of all forms, takes you from where you are to where you have to be. I'll say it again. It's powerful. Write it down. Art takes you from where you are to where you need to be. This is why the humanities are so important for us. This is why we need to expose ourselves to good art of all kinds, because it changes us in some way. By the way, did you see the group effect? It's not just one tree. It's a whole bunch of those trees, right? And then the music. The music, notice it's a repetition that keeps coming back, almost like music. It reached us, we followed it. Notice the singer. That is to say, this is a poem not just about us, it's also about the artist. My artists who have studied this poem love this. Look at it on page 662. The artist, the singer, at line 127, laughed till he wept to see us. He was so glad. In other words, what is it like to be a musician and to write a piece of music that other people listen to, and you know that they enjoy it, and you know that it moves them? Can you imagine what that's got to feel like, to be that artist, to be that musician, to know, I created that, and somebody was moved by that? Remarkable experience. And yet, this is what all